Greetings! Welcome back to the Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel. This is the third installment in the Introduction to Wood Carving series, and today we're going to talk about wood. Carving wood. For a wood to be really good for carving use, it needs to be soft. Now, the very first thing we need to mention is that when people say softwood, there are two different things that they mean by that. Okay? One is softwood is used as a shorthand to denote trees that are gymnosperms, cone-bearing trees. Okay? Pines, spruces, firs, but then also redwoods and cedars and ginkgo. These are all cone-bearing trees. These are all softwoods by that definition. Okay? And then hardwood being the broadleaf trees, oak, ash, maple, etc. Okay? The second is wood, saying softwood can mean wood that is actually soft. Okay? This is a little bit confusing because there are quite a few softwoods which are harder than hardwoods and vice versa. Okay? The softest wood in the world is balsa, which is a hardwood. And yew is substantially harder than yew wood, which is yew is a cone-bearing plant. It is a softwood, but yew wood is historically used and currently used for wooden bows quite readily. It is extremely hard, and it is substantially harder than quite an array of hardwoods. Okay, so for this video, when I call something a softwood, I am talking about its texture and how it cuts under the knife, not whether it is a gymnosperm or an angiosperm derived plank. Okay? So I just want to be clear about that this is about woods which actually are soft, not about conifers. So let's get into it. The way we measure wood hardness is called the Janka scale. And the Janka hardness scale, it's a measurement of how many foot-pounds of pressure it takes to press a little ball into a plank. Okay? So you take a piece of wood, a sample, you put it in a machine. The machine presses a little ball bearing into the wood until it has penetrated a certain distance and then measures how many pounds of force it took to generate that depression. Okay? So when I give you some Janka numbers here, it's foot-pounds of force required to get the ball bearing down to the same degree in every case. Okay? The range, just to kind of put this in perspective, the range of Janka hardnesses starts at the bottom with 67 for balsa wood, okay, 67 foot-pounds of force, all the way up to the hardest wood in the world, lignum vitae, which is 4,390 foot-pounds to get the ball bearing down the same degree. Okay, so that's just to kind of give you a range. The hardest two woods that we have in North America are Osage orange and persimmon, which are both in the mid-2000s on the Janka scale. Okay, so that's just kind of the range. Hard maple is 1450, and that's kind of 14 to 18 is where most of our domestic hardwoods live. Hard maple, ash, oak, hickory, those sort of hardwoods all tend to fall in that kind of 14 to 18 range. Okay? So I just give those numbers for perspective. The woods that we like to carve that are best for carving, especially as a beginner carver, you want to work on the softer side. You can carve balsa, right? It is buttery soft, cuts like a dream, tends to fuzz a little bit if you're sanding it. It tends to fuzz a lot if you're sanding it. It's not easy to sand smooth. But you can carve balsa wood. The downside to carving balsa wood is that it is so soft it dents easily, so your object tends to not be durable. Okay? If you want something, like a Christmas tree ornament, this is going to be 2 videos from now. We're going to carve this little guy together out of the second blank. If you want something like this that you're going to handle, that you're going to throw in a box, that you're going to work with in any consequential way, you want a little bit harder. You want a wood that's a little bit harder than balsa. If you do carve balsa, you want to put a really durable epoxy finish or spar varnish, multiple layers of spar varnish or something on it that will give it at least a hard outer coating. And then it's okay. The woods I'm going to talk about are all Janka hardness ratings between 350 and 400. Okay. Also, I'm only really going to talk here about United States or North America domestic woods. Okay, I'm not going to get into the whole world of soft carvable woods. I'm not going to get into tropicals. I'm just going to talk about I live in the Finger Lakes region of New York. I'm going to talk about what's available here and a little bit more broadly in North America. Okay, so I want you to be able to have a reasonable list of things to look for so that wherever you live, you can find something reasonable to start your carver's journey. Okay. These kind of start probably the most famous and easiest to get of all of these woods is basswood. Okay. Basswood is Tilia americana. There's also European lime, another species of Tilia, and it's a little bit harder than the American species, but still very nice. If you see European lime, it's basically the same. And it's a very nice, it's a classic wood. It is a broadleaf tree. It's an angiosperm, so a hardwood, but it's soft. So very nice, very smooth texture. It's not resinous, so it doesn't really get hard spots in it the way pine can. Okay, and it's not super splitty, so it has that advantage. We have basswoods here on the property, but I love the tree, so I just hate to cut them down. So mostly I use pine. Okay, this guy is pine. Most of the duck decoys that I carve are pine. And white pine and basswood, by the numbers, are pretty much the same. Okay? They have some small differences. I feel, just from my experience, like pine is a little bit more elastic, and it's a little bit less likely to chatter, but not to a real consequential degree. The biggest thing you'll note if you carve a lot of pine is every once in a while you'll get a white pine board that just has a miserable hard spot in it. And you won't see that with basswood. Okay? So if you get one of those white pine boards with a miserable hard spot in it, then just chuck that section out. It's cheap. When I buy pine from the local sawmill as, rough cut dimension lumber, it's, 20, depending on who you buy it from, like 20, 30, 40 cents a board foot. A board foot is a piece of wood a foot by an inch thick. Okay, and that's kind of the unit of measurement for buying lumber. So you're getting more than 2 board feet for a buck. You can afford to throw away a hard chunk. Okay? And I use pine because it is so readily available. Any size I want, I can get. I can go to any of the local Amish sawmills. I can say, I want a pine board this by this by this, and buy it for very little money. Also, I can get slabbing for firewood prices. Okay, slabbing is when you cut a tree at a sawmill, first they cut off the round outside. That's the slabbing. That's a waste material. And then they'll cut it down to a square block and then cut boards off of the block. So that outer waste material I can get for firewood prices, or sometimes even they'll say, that piece is annoying me, take it for free. Okay? So go around and talk to sawmills, see what they have. So I use pine because it's readily available. Some other good woods, if you live further north, if you're watching this from eastern Canada, or if you're watching this from the west coast, you're going to have a lot of cedar. Okay? Western red cedar, incense cedar, Atlantic white cedar, the white cedar that grows in the mountainous regions. All of these are wonderful, wonderful carving woods. This is an antique duck decoy, and I'm pretty sure it's a Stevens decoy. I'm not 100% confident. If anybody out there is real good at identifying decoys, let me know in the comments if this is indeed a Stevens decoy. But somebody sanded all the paint off it so you can see the wood real well. And you can see the cedar has this beautiful kind of iridescent grain in it. I really love the wood. This is white cedar. It's in the same range, 350 to 400. All of these woods are in the same range. Okay. It feels under the knife a little bit softer than pine. It's a little splittier though. So I do love carving cedar. These two little boat models are red cedar, which is a bit harder. This is more in like the 600 or 700 range, a little bit above the 400 range. The cedars tend to be a little bit splitty. So if you get too greedy with your knife and you drag into cross grain, you could split off a big chunk just faster than you could even realize it's happening. That's the downside to cedar. You really have to watch your grain structure. But it's softer feeling under the knife. Even though these are on paper about 200 foot-pounds of energy harder than white pine, it feels softer under the knife than white pine, or at least similar, okay? So there is more to this than just the raw numbers, but they will give you a good starting point. So anything with the word cedar in it will be a marvelous carving wood. A lot of carving down, just talking about regional carving for a minute, a lot of carving down in the southeast was also done with Tupelo, and was done with cypress, especially cypress knees are very soft, very nice carving wood. Okay, so if you're down in those regions, you have those regional woods that you can look into. Across the whole East Coast, you used to have large amounts of butternut. This is a modern one. This is not an antique. It's also not one that I carved. It's one that I bought because I really love the paint on it. But if you look at his belly here, you can see there's kind of an orange tone and openness in the grain. Okay, this is white walnut or butternut. Okay, it's a very close relative to a Japanese species called heartnut, which you could also try. And these are around 490. Okay, so it's only slightly harder than the pine. Another marvelous wood. So it very soft, very nice under the knife. I do not recommend that you go and cut down butternut trees. They're not officially classified as endangered, I don't think. They might, probably in some states locally, yes. But they are suffering badly from a pathogen that's wiping them out. So we need to keep those disease-resistant butternuts growing, reproducing, and making a new population so it doesn't become all the way endangered or extinct. So be nice to the butternuts, but if you contact a landscaper, or if you know one that's coming down for other reasons, or you just luckily find it in a load of logs that you're at a sawmill, talk to small sawmills, tell them what you're after, give them a list, and if they see stuff, they'll tell you. Okay? So if you find one serendipitously, then go for it. Beautiful carving wood. Okay? From there, we're kind of going into one last one. Buckeye and horse chestnut is in the same hardness range, and the aspens, the true poplars, are in the same hardness range. Now, those have more of a shrinkage than the others. So if you're making a large block, you're more likely to get splitting than if you use pine or some of these other things. But they are in the same hardness range. So you can look at buckeye, you can look at horse chestnut, you can look at quaking aspen, you can look at big tooth aspen, you can look at all of these as very nice carving woods. All over the place. The dough bowls for mixing bread and kneading bread were traditionally made out of poplars, true poplars in many areas. That brings us up into the harder woods that are still decent for carving, but once we get into this next range, I'm doing a lot more rasp work than just knife work. And that's the so-called yellow poplar or tulip poplar, which is Liriodendron tulipifera. It is not a poplar. Okay? It is actually a relative of magnolias. Okay? So in the category of tulip poplar is magnolia wood. Again, if you know a landscaper bringing trees down, you might serendipitously find a magnolia tree. Throw it in your carving stash. So these are a little bit harder, but they still feel very nice under the knife, but you're going to have to use some more force. Okay? And once we get into this range, I tend to go toward rasp work, predominating over knife work, but I still do knife work in this range. Okay? That is around 540 is the stated hardness for this. Then we go into the lost my train of thought for a second. The next step up in harder hardwoods is your soft maples, your red maple, your your box elder, those sorts of trees, and the softer birches. Some birch can be extremely hard. Okay, and some birch relatives can be extremely hard. There's like hop hornbeam has the nickname ironwood, right, for good reason. It's as hard as hard maple. But the softer birches and the soft maples are on the order of 700 to 900 foot-pounds. Okay, harder to work. Definitely, we're moving into harder to work territory. But these are good if you're doing something like a cooking utensil. If you want to make a wooden cup or a wooden spoon or something on that line. For that, because it's going to be in contact with food, you want closed grain. Okay? And you want a bit more hardness. Again, just like I don't really recommend carving balsa because if you drop it, you're going to dent it. If you're sticking stuff in boiling water and letting it dry out all the time, wet, dry, wet, dry, wet, dry, these softer woods that I have here, you're going to split. They're not going to last long in actual utilitarian use. So you want to go up another level, but not into crazy town. So that's where the soft maple and the soft birches can be really good. So if you want to do spoons for use rather than spoons for hanging on the wall, or, you know, same thing like a beer stein that you would actually use or a kuksa that you would actually use, go into those sorts of woods. Okay? And then there's real hardwood. So this set of 3 little ducks are intended for metal casting. These are patterns for metal casting, and they are hard maple. Okay, so these are going to be made into sand molds for drafting ducks and paperweights. This little ruddy duck is going to be a paperweight. So I'm going to pack those in sand and stamp it onto them. So they really need some hardness. But now with this, we are definitely into the true realm of 90% of the wood removed from these is with a rasp and a file and saw work and hard tools, okay, chisels and that sort of stuff. You're really getting into that territory with this hardness. Okay. Now, where am I getting these numbers? 2 last things. All of these numbers came from a website called the Wood Database. It is wood-database.com. I will put a link to that in the description to this video, so you can go and look up woods. That database has lots of international woods. So if you're watching this from somewhere that is not in a mixed forest temperate zone, go think about what woods you have looked locally and look up their hardness. Anything that's in that 300 to 400 range will be amazing for carving. 400 to 600 will be a little harder to work, but okay. And then there's a lot of other individual properties that come into play that might make one your favorite over another. Okay? So look up what you have locally. And the last thing I'm going to say is woods to always avoid. Now, I say always avoid, yet I have a carving that shows why you should avoid them. So, you know, grain of salt on everything. But hard pine and hemlock, I strongly recommend you avoid. So if you look here at the grain in this strip on this boat, I had half enough wood to make this, and I threw some scraps in to fill out the rest. So, and I did this with rasp work too, because I knew I was using some trash wood. But if you look at this, you have the dark and the light grain in that hard pine. That is absolutely miserable to work, because this hard grain is on the same order as maple, and the soft grain is back in that 300 to 400 range. So it is really a nightmare to work. It is not fun. Stay away from it. Now, sadly, most construction wood is hem-fir bix, and predominantly it is this stuff. Okay? So I very much recommend that you do not go to the hardware store and buy dimensional lumber to start your carving journey. You're inevitably going to get some of this that has this hard, soft grain, and you're going to have a miserable time of it. You might get lucky and find a good piece here or there, but you're not going to have fun with the overall experience. Okay? So stay away from that. What can you get at the local hardware store? Well, maybe not the local hardware store, but most of the big box hardware stores sell some form of cedar in 3/4 inch stock. So you can get started carving some small objects out of that 3/4 inch cedar. And if you want to do something larger, glue it together with Elmer's. Elmer's is about the softest glue that you can use, and it won't overly blunt. It's a lot softer than yellow wood glue. It won't overly blunt your tools, and you can stack up a couple of pieces of that, and it's not going to ruin your day. Okay? And then you can work with some of that cedar. So if you're watching this in an urban environment and you only have a hardware store to go to, you don't have a local sawmill, look for one of the big box, cheap mark hardware stores and find some cedar of some sort. Okay? And that'll be a good thing to get you started. So I hope this is helpful. Coming up next, we're going to actually talk about using the tools and making some of the basic cuts, how to handle the tools safely. I hope you will join us for that video as well. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you see when it posts. Till then, have a wonderful day.